Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, visions and philosophy defined contemporary India. My guest today is a woman who is legion. As the founder, the inspiration, the driving force of SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, a model that is being replicated around the world. She's been a nominated member of the Rajya Sabha, a member of the National Commission of Women, and has been an activist for the cause of women and the underprivileged, leading both from behind and the front with her membership of numerous international and national organizations and agencies. I'm delighted to welcome Mrs. Ela Bhatt. Namaskar, Ela.
Thank
you. You have worked primarily in the cause of women in many different contexts from the time that you were in Parliament, your work with the National Commission for Women and SEWA. In what ways do you think that the women's movement in India is unique or different to, say, the feminist movement in the West?
I think in India the women's movement is more realistic, and it takes up the causes, the issues of rural women, of poor women, and those issues have been taken up. Though the leadership still remains with, if I may say, with the urban and so-called elite class, but the concern is quite genuine. What is another thing that is happening is that now those women at the grassroots are getting organized in small way, in bigger way, and they are being recognized by the women's movement in India. So the issues of livelihoods, of access to, say, credit, and then their rights as forest dwellers. Such basic issues are being taken up.
In the West, the women's movement has seen itself as some way setting itself up against men. So there are issues of sexual harassment. There are issues of discrimination and issues around that. Here, it seems to me that you're laying an emphasis on more fundamental aspects that concern women's survival, women's security, and those nuances. In what ways does this play off against issues of that the sort of the Western notions of feminism are familiar with?
I think in the West also it is now changing. It is what they call gender and not anymore man-woman thing. Here, I think so far as I understand women's movement, it's more against the systems. So which, the role of men also becomes a part of that system. When I said unemployment or semi-employment, or that minimum wages are not available, or access to credit is not available. It is not a question so much of men women, but somehow our policymakers and our systems see only men as the head of the family, only as only think men as the main say breadwinner, and therefore the planning and other systems, all these resources go to the men where they are working. So it is not directly men women.
Could you give us some examples of this as to how this happens, that the policies of development and the structures are focusing at men rather than women?
Look at the whole system of recognition of hawkers and vendors. If we see the downtown markets, a large number of them are women. But because the policy is only sees that those who are entrepreneurs are only men, so only they get an access to having identity cards or licenses, and those with baskets and those who are squatters in the market are just left out of the whole system. Look at the entire production in this country of production of goods and services is done through the self-employed sector, which means that where there is no employer-employee relationship, and this production is done in homes, and it's the women who are producing. Of course, there are also men, but large number of the producers are women in homes. But the home-based production or producer is not recognized as producer by law. because the perception is that that employment is there only in offices and in factories.
So when we talk
And
about
therefore-
employment generation activities for youth, we inevitably mean men.
Men, yes. So without, without in letters or maybe in spirit, discriminating on paper, but what happens is that it's the men who get and women, get left out. But still, my point is that in the case of poor, it's not a question of men-woman thing. See, at the family level, like SEWA, which is a women's organization entirely. But even then, when we see that woman or the SEWA member is able to get an access to the bank or to the legal aid and these things, so it is not that men who is jealous. So in poor families, from whatever sources, more income comes, more sort of security comes, then it is welcome. It is not a man-woman thing.
Yes.
So it's not totally easy, but however, it's not so.
Your sort of your initiation into sort of a public activism was with the setting up of SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, and it was in a sense unionizing the people who were not working in the organized sector. And I think sort of one of the great achievements of SEWA was that it was more than a union fighting for its right. It was also something, a coming together, working for each other in a supportive, collaborative context. That was sort of the vision that you started with. In what ways do you feel that your vision, your agenda has expanded, enlarged, changed?
I think whatever we started at the union level, at the grassroots, has now become a national and an international issue, and also a solution. Because on one hand we take up the issue, on the other hand we also take up a kind of a solution, an answer to it. So because it has been a balanced joint action of union, that is and cooperative, or a joint action of struggle and development both, after now 27 years, it has shown some concrete results, and that has been taken as an answer, one of the answers to fight poverty and to gain full employment at the household level. We started with home-based workers issue, that they are also workers. That issue we took up, and it took 16 years for us to take it up, and then later on it became an international issue. So all the trade unions of the world who joined, and then it came to the agenda of ILO, and then for 2 years we fought, and then where we were a sort of a leader, and the most knowledgeable agency there, and then we won the ILO convention for home-based workers. So it is called ILO Convention on Homework, which means that as you know that ILO Convention has force of law, and therefore which means that all the member countries of ILO have to have a legislation for home workers, and then keeping them at par with other workers. And now our country is also now planning for a legislation for also for a national policy for home workers. So not only in India but all over the world. So home-based workers, so which are women mostly, but still as a strategy that without naming them as women, these home-based workers are now recognized as workers.
Now that you have sort of emerged as the stateswoman for the cause of women and women in deprivation in particular, what larger agendas do you see for yourself that will impact these basic fundamental dilemmas and crises?
One is, as I said, home-based workers. The other thing is a statutory policy for hawkers and vendors, because street vendors contain a very large portion of the self-employed and amongst the poorest. Another is on forest. We have been saying that our demand is that feminize the forest. Let all the plantation work and let all the nursery raising work be handed over to women. of the villages. And why should Forest Development Corporation should get into raising nurseries? So let it be given to to village women, and that creates so much employment at the local level. Then we are demanding for microfinance as a policy, that microfinance has to be recognized and have to be in the mainstream of the banking sector. The other thing is correcting the statistics of the home-based workers. Now that SEWA has a good, strong research department, and we have been collaborating with the best of the research institutes of this country and also abroad.
India has some of the best legislative record and legislations looking at issues concerning women, and yet somehow there is a gap between what Parliament legislates and what happens, and you have been in Parliament yourself. How do we begin to bridge these? Is there some sort of larger macro shift in paradigm that we need to work towards, that we need to cultivate beyond legislation in Parliament?
Oh yes, legislation is a very poor tool for any change, particularly in social kinds of change. I think, my thinking may be limited, but I think work, employment, and full employment at the household level, the macro level, but at the household level, where there is full employment, in the sense that where there is food security, income security, and social security. At least by social security I mean healthcare, childcare, and shelter. That has to be secured, and where so in our case we have done it through women, but I think that is one of the things.
But in a global climate where governments are retreating from providing these very services, healthcare and education and the allied services, where does it leave the poor?
But then in that case, we will have instances of sati. So a sati is not related to something truth, but if it is, so then that is the real truth, that a woman, Dalit, poor, village woman, and who may be working or not working, ill, she has no respectability. Only for respectability she has to plunge into a fire.
How do you respond to these sort of the consequences of the economic globalization, of the growth of capitalism, of the retreat of state support for social services? How do you react to this changing global ethos, and to which we are increasingly becoming participants?
What I am worried is about this materialism, too much of consumerism. Wanting to spend more and more and more, and too many choices. That I am very much afraid of, and that I think we are going to consume all the resources and will not leave anything for. So that is one thing. But as such, I am not against globalization or privatization or liberalization, because we are poor and then we are working. We also need to be liberalized. We are private. A hawker is a private. A home-based worker is
private,
private
enterprise. Yes.
So that is private. What we need is that those terms and those norms have to percolate all the way down, so that those who are bound by this Inspector Raj and license Raj and all these things, they also get liberated. What we need on our side, what we need is to get organized, build up the economic organizations, build up social organizations, and then take up the challenge. And the role of the government at the international and at the national level is to facilitate, not to take up the implementation like the Indian government itself, but to facilitate and then provide access to knowledge, access to resources, finance, and the know-how. So that is the role of the government. And I have found that our people, they may be poor, they may be scattered, men, women, they are so resourceful. They are surviving in spite of all these, so having no enabling kind of environment, but they are surviving. So if they are given this opportunity, I think they will be able to bring and change the face of this country.
When you started your work, you was greatly inspired by Gandhiji. In what ways do you feel, looking back, that you have traveled? What paths have you traveled? And do you feel a shift in the ideological framework that you would look at your work now today and look at the solutions that are emerging from your own work?
No, I'm getting more and more confirmed about the Gandhian approach, and that is mainly decentralization, the decentralized power and decentralized resources. So I think partly the world is also aiming towards that, but so on a wrong way. The world is also now talking about decentralize the resources and powers, but when they talk about decentralization or devolution, it's mainly think of big businesses.
Moving from government to multinationals.
Yes. So once it was private sector, and now it is public sector, and now again going back to private. But Gandhi talked about the in-between large, massive people sector. So that somehow is missing. So I think that whenever, and then not only SEWA, but wherever they got organized, like Amul or like Grameen Bank, wherever they have come together, they have shown that they have the capacity. What the world needs to do, what the governments and the country and the elite class need to do, is to share their know-how. And then what at the grassroots level, what we need is to get organized with a focus to change the economic life, because poverty and for poor, economic life is the first thing, but ultimately to come out of the vulnerability. But the government policies and the World Bank, they have a very narrow vision and the focus. When they talk of economic, they do not talk of social security, healthcare, childcare, shelter. These are all these factors which are necessary to come out of poverty. So health is not separate from work security, or that work is not separate, from childcare or from shelter. Similarly, capacity building. We have to build up our people's capacity to fight the vulnerability, which is to be a better manager, to be a better accountant.
But how do you build up people's capacities?
Oh yes, that is the ongoing thing. Like you see that.
You educate them, you empower them. How do you go? What techniques and strategies
empowering
have you
is
used?
The whole process of being able to manage one's own affairs. It may be finance, it may be one's own life, but to be able to manage one's own affairs and to have access to capital.
What are the mechanisms of empowering someone? Is it leadership? Is it because you were there in the community and you were supportive, you were encouraging, you made them feel that they could do it? Is that empowerment? Is empowerment legislation? Is empowerment, you mentioned credit? What are the elements of really empowering?
It is not one thing. It is capital, asset to have one's own money. It may be small. It is also capacity to management. It is also capacity. It is also healthcare, childcare, shelter like social security, and organizing. Organizing is the basic thing. If you have a glass, then you can put some input like water or milk or whatever. But if you don't have a local glass, a kind of a receptacle, so that is organization, then I don't think we can put the whole all those inputs gets filtered away. So these inputs, capital or training or upgrading skills, all those inputs. For that you need a constant glass, an organization, which over a period of time becomes bigger and stronger. We need, management schools at the local level. Running any program. It may be at the village level, savings and credit group. It may be at the village level, a dairy cooperative, or running a childcare center. All that needs management to help them to prepare their plan. do we have such the Indian Institute of Management, the IIMs, for such purpose? We need to bring down that knowledge and technique over there.
Have you given up, in a sense, hope with governments and the structures of administration that the government makes available? You said, you've been in some ways working struggling, with and against the system for more than 25 years with SEWA and thereafter. Do you feel any changes in the receptivity of governments and administrations to the sort of, the real world dilemmas and challenges and needs?
I'm not very much disappointed with the government, to be frank. We have always tried to work with the government because they have the resources and they have the power to decide. So our experience has been on one side, frustrating, at the same time also encouraging. So we have tried to keep the balance and hope. So I have not a feeling of hopelessness for the government. When you see when you see the bureaucracy, you see that there are always 5-10% who are very responsive and very helpful. But the whole thing is the mindset of that system and having no regard for our common people. They take it for granted that poor cannot be independent. Poor has to be helped. Poor has to be a beneficiary, or the woman has to be helped. They also they are a resource, and they have got all that what you have plus something more. That mindset is lacking, and we look too much to the West or to the industrialized countries. So their whatever has been their solution, we quickly try to copy them. Somehow we have not able to realize and see and recognize the whole strength of our own people. And if that is not done, then I think all our treasure and wealth of traditional knowledge and skills will get eroded. So far as government is concerned, we have got so many things done from the government as well, but at the same time, because the macro atmosphere is so different, not different, but so beyond our reach that it gets. By the time you reach a level, by that time it is something is changed.
You have received so much recognition, so much applause, and I described you earlier. You're a stateswoman for the causes that you represent. Have you considered acting or functioning now at this macro level that so needs to be worked on and improved? Has that come up for you? Participation in Parliament, being active in politics, working more actively at that larger stage, to make more real, your wonderful achievements at numerous micro levels.
Actually, I want my feet to be steady and strong at the grassroots. We, as SEWA and myself, are playing at macro level. But as you say, Parliament, I don't think it can bring change, or that I can bring a change being in the Parliament, because unfortunately in our country that when as you take up election and contest elections, then you have to take up a party, and then because you belong to a particular party, then the other party, all others become your enemies. So you can't operate. And then when I was in the Parliament, at that time I didn't belong to any party. So for that matter, so I didn't carry any political clout. I know, and then without having a political clout, you can't bring a change. However, whatever I said was accepted 100% right and pure, because I didn't have anything.
Didn't have a hidden
of my
agenda.
own. Yes. but I would vote, as I like, according to the merit of the case. So who would trust me? So my going to the active politics is, but I think whatever SEWA is doing, and then whatever I have been doing is political action, because maybe in a small way, but we are changing the balance of power in favor of poor and poor women, in favor of informal sector. So I think now that we see after 27 years, now we see, second Labour Commission, which has been set up, and where one of the terms of reference is to have an umbrella legislation for the workers in the unorganized sector. So, which is that way it has been, though it took long, but even then, now the unorganized sector, informal sector has become visible. Earlier, Shram Shakti report at that time when I was chairing, so it was only women, and now men and women both, all. So I think that is a commitment that the government has shown, maybe because of the pressure from, say from organizations like ours. However, still, legislation has a limitation, and then when the government will bring the legislation, how this unorganized sector will be able to get recognition, protection, enhancement is, I'm not sure about that.
Do I sense sort of a note of pessimism there? Do you remain optimistic that the momentum that you have generated will continue to deliver?
No, I'm not pessimist at all. I'm quite enthusiastic. In fact, I feel that all my, the last 50 years of freedom, after freedom, it has been, for me, it has been a constant fulfillment. So I'm not at all, cynic. I have great faith in the people of India. So I'm not frustrated at that. What I'm most worried is about spending too much unnecessarily, and then that I'm not against modern or fashions or nice things, but it's too much of things, too many clothes, too many kinds of eating, and then not using your hand, physical labor. So that worries me a lot.
Ela ji, thank you very much.